Hello, everyone, and welcome. Happy to see a lot of people tuning into this webinar about deep insights. Happy to have you here. Maybe we will give you just a few more seconds for everyone to join, but then we are ready to go from the Alva side.
So great.
Hope that everyone has some sun outside their window today, across the whole of Sweden, maybe even abroad. Cool. I think, yeah, now it is 2 p.m., at least Swedish time. So let's kick things off. And a warm welcome again to everyone listening in. I'm super happy that you are so engaged, that you have signed up and that you're here with us and prioritizing this. Me and Kajsa, my colleague from Alva Labs, have really looked forward to this session together with all of you. So this is a launch webinar. We're going to talk about Deep Insights, the new report that Alva is launching this week. So this report will give you just a further tool, really, to truly get to know your candidates and your employees even better, and to kind of get a better understanding of their natural tendencies and their personality and their preferences at work. So we're going to walk you through this new report and, of course, open up for all of your questions along the way. But first and foremost, some introductions, I think, is a good idea. Kajsa, again, my colleague from Alva, has been around at Alva Labs for almost a decade, actually. That's pretty amazing, really impressive, and have a solid background as a licensed psychologist and also with a PhD in talent management. So a spot on background for sitting in this position today, I would say. Do you want to add something about yourself, Kajsa? Did I miss anything?
Oh, I think that's a great introduction, Frida. Again, starting to feel like part of the inventory here at Alva, but I guess that comes with being at a company that's a lot of fun and a lot of stuff happening all the time, right? So you never get tired of it, basically.
Absolutely, that's very true. Always new at the job in some kind of way. And I'm Frida, and I've been around at Alva for about a year, actually, a few days until its anniversary, time to celebrate. But I have a background myself within talent acquisition primarily. So I've been working also actually a decade within different large global enterprises, primarily within tech, and have been focusing a lot on everything from hands-on hiring to designing processes and defining the right methods to leading recruitment teams towards the end of my TA career up until now. So now at Alva, I'm in a customer success manager role. And I think that our knowledge and our passion, me and Kajsa, for TA and talent management is really why we want to be here and want to share this exciting news with all of you. So I think it could be good to have a look at the agenda perhaps and see what we're going to walk through today. We have had a think about what you want to be most excited about learning. So Kajsa is going to talk about the purpose with this report, like the why, simply why we have launched it, and also of course walk you through the the content of the report, what does it consist of, and how should you interpret it as a TA partner and a TA leader. And then we're going to talk about some concrete use cases, and then here hopefully I will add some value to talk about how you actually can apply this in practice within your role within TA or HR. And then, as I promised earlier on, there's going to be a big portion of the Q&A part. We are so curious to hear your feedback and your questions, because this launch is really something that is a lot based on requests from all of you as Alva Labs customers primarily. You have really wanted these deep insights. So keep them coming. All these requests and the feedback and your valuable input is very much in line with what we want to hear. So Q&A as the end of this section. And you can post your questions already now. You'll see in the chat here, you can post it right away throughout the questions and we will make sure to answer. And if there's any question that we don't have time for, we're going to revisit that and of course follow up with you afterwards. So all questions will get answered one way or the other. Anything that I missed, Kajsa, that you want to add before you kick things off?
No, I don't think so, Frida. Great introduction, and yeah, excited to get started.
Let's do this then.
Exactly. So with no further ado, let's start by just setting the scene a little bit, because this is a feature that's been long awaited by a lot of customers. As many of you probably know already, one of the main benefits of Alva's 5-factor test report is that it is really condensed. It's really designed to enable all candidates to understand the content without having to, spend an hour with the TA or the recruiter going through the results. So that's one of the main, I would say, USPs of Alva's basic sort of default report on the 5-factor test. That being said, a lot of you have also requested something that goes a bit deeper. So something that will enable you to sort of draw richer, more granular insights from the personality test, both for the use case of late stage recruitment or senior hires, and also for different kinds of development initiatives. So leadership development, leadership coaching, talent management, etc. So that's the background to why we crafted this Deep Insights report, which is basically a deeper, meatier report on top of Alva's 5-factor personality test. Perfect for these use cases of final selection, leadership development, and talent management. So to make it a bit more concrete, the idea here is not for the candidate to take some additional test or go through some additional assessment. This is basically another report layer on top of the 5-factor test, just like Alva's leadership report functions. It does not replace role fit or test profiles in any way. As mentioned, the idea is rather to save this report for the final stages of a hiring process to gain a deeper view and to use it for development. For that reason, this is going to be a toggle in the product. And so as you can see in the screenshot here to the right, once this is live, you are going to be able to toggle it on under assessments for those use cases where this is actually a good fit. The results are initially not shared with the candidate, and this is because this is a new feature, right? And we want to have some time to develop it and make sure it lands just as great as it possibly can, and that we enable our customers to also feed the results back in a good way. But the long-term plan, as usual with Alva, is for the results to be transparent to the candidate as well. Not included in the AI summary at this point either. So those are just a few practical pointers. Anything you think we should add or expand on here, Frida?
I don't think so, actually. I think you covered it all. And maybe just to add that, like, I think this tool hopefully will enable you as TA partners to be like perceived even more as the experts that you are. Like, I think that use case is very, very important. And that is a lot about the why we built it as well, for you to be fully set up for success, to really contribute with value throughout the recruitment process. So that's an
exactly.
I am.
That's really true. And I mean, a 5-factor result in its entirety is so rich, right? There's so much gold to draw from a result like that. So we want to make sure that you're able to get everything out of that result that you possibly can, especially in those use cases where you really want to, go deep. All right, so let's then jump into the structure and the content of the report, right, Frida?
Let's do it.
Perfect. So this report is structured in 3 broad sections that we are calling working mode, relationship mode, and challenges. And these 3 pillars, if you will, are then further broken down into a number of sub areas, at least working mode and relationship mode. And the whole report, you might say, is built on the premise that it's often in the combinations of traits that we find the nuances, the important nuances. So for instance, being an conscientious introvert is something different from being a conscientious extrovert. And we're going to go deeper into those trait combinations when we expand on these different areas. But the idea is that we're looking at combinations of traits to really paint the nuances of the candidate. In the challenges section, there are no sort of subsections, if you will. That's just one part, and we're going to go deeper on Alva's view on challenges when we get to that section, because this is not the same as things you might have heard that are called derailment tendencies or dark sides or anything like that. But we'll get to that in due course. So if we start with working mode then, this section is all about a person's way of approaching work. So their work styles in different ways. And here we have three lenses then. It's decision-making style, it's detail versus big picture orientation, and we also have pace and drive. Starting then with decision-making style. So here we want to paint a nuanced picture of how a person is likely to approach decision-making. Are they likely to be very reflective and thought through when they make their decisions? Do they want to have all aspects covered and analyzed before going into action mode? Or are they more intuitive, more focused on getting to action as fast as possible? And here we're looking at a combination of carefulness, which is basically the decision-making part of conscientiousness. We've got extroversion and we've got openness. So if we look at this in practice, a person who is high on all of these traits would be likely to present a decision-making style that is thought through, but mostly focusing on the big picture stuff driven by openness then. So that would be a person who wants to reflect on decisions, but they do it by considering the big picture part of it, so the principles behind this decision. Meanwhile, extroversion would also sort of drive a certain willingness to get to action as soon as possible. On the other hand, if we would look at someone who is a bit lower on carefulness, but still high on extroversion, well, then you're getting this more action-oriented person, right? Who might not consider all aspects of the decision before jumping into, acting, but who would rather see that something gets done. If we would have a combination with lower openness, well, then we have someone who's probably more focused on the nitty-gritty of the decision. So what are the facts on the table? What are the practicalities, etc.? So what all this reveals is whether someone tends to decide intuitively or more analytically, quickly or cautiously, independently or through interaction with others. And overall, obviously, this has a lot of implications for how the person is going to act at work, right? So that's the first part of working mode. If we then get on to detail versus big picture orientation, this is a section that has a lot of bearing on, for instance, whether you tend to sort of be more inclined towards the operational side of issues or rather the more strategic or holistic side of things. So here we have carefulness again. We've got orderliness, which is another conscientiousness facet, and we also get openness. So if we take some of the extremes here, if we've got someone who is highly careful, highly orderly, but maybe a bit lower on openness, well, there we're going to find a profile who is highly focused on details, who wants things to be perfectly in order, who tends to analyze things based on the practicalities and wants things to be done right, and who might get a little bit lost when it comes to sort of elevating your view and looking at the big picture situation. Whereas someone who's a bit lower on carefulness and orderliness, but on the other hand, high on openness, will tend to have this big picture orientation, right? Who loves to take a helicopter view, who loves to think strategically, to think long term, but who might, on the other hand, forget about some of the operational stuff and some of the nitty-gritties. So this is a lot about where your focus lies, what you think are the interesting aspects of work, and perhaps also where some of your blind spots lie. Moving on then to pace and drive. So this, I think, is an interesting area because sometimes when you talk about the 5-factor model, you get the impression that your sort of drive or the tempo of your work only has to do with conscientiousness, but that's actually not really true. Obviously, goal striving, which is included here, is a super important part of conscientiousness when it comes to sort of determining your willingness to work hard and work in a diligent way towards goals, etc. But extroversion and emotional stability also play key roles here. So if we take a person who's high on both of these factors, so extroversion and emotional stability, in combination with a high goal striving, then we're going to get a person who's very sort of comfortable working in spurts of energy, who likes a deadline, who likes to sort of push towards a time-bound goal, preferably together with a team, right? Who gets super engaged by that, but on the other hand, might lose interest or energy a little bit when everything is just sort of the same tempo all the time. Whereas if we're looking at a person who's lower on extroversion, and especially if we add somewhat lower emotional stability as well, then this is probably a person who likes to work at the same tempo every day, who does not enjoy being hurried, who likes to set a plan for themselves, which is based on the idea that I'm going to do basically the same amount of work every day, and I'm going to be done well in advance of the deadline. But when something sort of gets thrown in from the side and disturbs that plan, then that's not going to be the ideal state for that person. So by combining these traits, we get a much better image of, is this a person who likes to sort of work at the same pace all the time and who's sort of somewhat disturbed when plans change? Or do we get someone who likes to work in these spurs of energy, if you will? So that's working mode. Should we hop on to relationship mode?
Let's go for it. I think like everyone is probably thinking like, wow, it would be interesting to run themselves through this report. That's what I was thinking about. Yeah, it gives you like a really much more richer and more nuanced picture, I think, for sure.
It does, doesn't it?
Which kind of grades you get, basically, depending on the situation and context and team and all of that. So look forward to hear the collaboration, communication, and influencing parts as well.
That's great to hear, and I can only second that. I think personally, some of the most useful insights that I've gotten about my own personality has been when I've gotten these mappings of combinations of traits, right? You see stuff a lot more clearly. So looking at relationship mode then, again, we have 3 different lenses. We've got communication style, collaboration style, and influencing style. And naturally, when we talk about relationships, agreeableness and extroversion are going to be focal, as you can see in the included factors here, since agreeableness tends to represent your sort of social style and extroversion represents your social need. So those 2 factors are almost always central when we're talking about relationships at work. So if we start with communication style, here we've got then agreeableness and extroversion combined with conscientiousness, for the reason that conscientiousness tends to say a lot about whether we like to be structured and prepared in our communication. So if we get someone who's high on conscientiousness, this is going to be a person likely who prefers to prepare their speaking points in advance, who wants their communication to make a lot of sense, who wants to come with rational arguments, and also to make sure they know what to say in advance, right? Whether someone who's a bit lower on conscientiousness is probably much more comfortable being a bit spontaneous and sort of deciding what to say in the spur of the moment. And then when you combine that with agreeableness and extroversion, you also paint a lot of the nuances surrounding, whether you're going to be more cushioned or more direct in your communication, that's agreeableness for you. And also whether you're going to be, whether you're going to have like, maybe wrong to say speak at a higher volume, but to be, more assertive, more energetic, more perhaps overtly convincing in your communication. Whereas, with a lower extroversion, you're going to get more of this low key, a little bit more listening type of communicator, right? So this together, I think, paints a very nuanced picture of whether you're likely to communicate in a sort of engaging or reserved way. Are you going to be more diplomatic or more direct? And also how sort of thoughtful and structured you're going to be. This also, I think, touches on a really important ground truth for this report, which is that there are obviously no right or wrongs here. This is more about learning about where your sort of strong suits lie and where you might need to consider adding something to your toolbox, if you will. Because if we take communication style as an example, whatever comes easy for you is what you're going to use in most cases, right? That's the kind of communication style you're going to turn to if nothing else forces you to communicate in another manner. And that might be a perfect fit for your role, but it might also be that your role includes some contexts where that communication style is actually not ideal. And that can actually spur a lot of really interesting reflection questions around, do you need to modulate your communication style to suit that certain context? Or can you somehow sort of tailor the context to fit your communication style?
And I would say that it's interesting also when you think about if you constantly, like day after day, needs to like flex and adjust and like pivot and tweak your natural preferences, that might be a little bit draining us also. Like take a lot of energy and perhaps a little bit more time also, that you can't act more, instantly.
Exactly. I think that's so true, right? That when you're in an environment where you can use your natural strengths, that's going to be a lot easier for you. Whereas if you constantly have to sort of hold back and act in a different way, that's going to take a lot of energy. And here, I think organizational culture, for instance, can come into play. So are you in an organization that culturally sort of appreciates the kind of communication style that you bring to the table? Or are there aspects of the culture that are sort of at odds with your style? Moving on then to collaboration style. So here we've got agreeableness, extroversion, and emotional stability. Because obviously, a lot of emotions can arise by working together with other people. So emotional stability has a lot of bearing on how you're going to react when there are disagreements in your team, for instance, when your opinion did not get heard, or when a decision was not made in your favor, when you have to handle some kind of personal conflict in the group, build trust, etc. So by looking at this combination of traits, I think you're going to see a lot of the nuances when it has to do with both the kind of style that you're going to adopt in the group and the extent to which you're going to take a very dominant role in the group, right? So an individual, for instance, who's high on both agreeableness and extroversion is probably going to be perceived as a very warm people person on the team, right? Someone who's both taking a very focal role and who loves to take part in all the social activities that come with being a team, and who also has this sort of empathetic and warm approach that tends to make them a highly appreciated team member. Whereas if we've got someone who's a bit lower on agreeableness but still high on extroversion, well, then we're probably again going to get this sort of leader-like character who likes to take a big part in the group, but perhaps has a bit more of a direct style, right? And does not shy away from conflict or bringing up opposing views. This can be super valuable in a team, but it can also sometimes spark some misunderstandings, if you will, if it's not delivered in a thoughtful way. Again, adding emotional stability to the mix often says a lot about how predictable this person is going to be perceived as by the group, whether they are going to show outwardly how they're reacting to different decisions, etc. And again, there are some interesting nuances, right? So if we have a person, for instance, who's high on agreeableness, but a bit lower on emotional stability, well, then we might get a person who, on the surface, always cares about others and sort of orients towards consensus and the well-being of the group, but on the inside is actually carrying quite a heavy burden, and might be the person who sort of has to carry some of the emotional luggage that comes with being a team. Then looking at influencing style, so we included this in the report, since influencing is basically part of any role that you have in working life today, right? Even if you don't hold a formal leadership role, in most cases, you still need to be able to influence different stakeholders, influence your team members, etc. And here we're looking at a combination of extroversion, agreeableness, and openness. Since openness has a lot to do with the kinds of arguments you tend to adopt. So if you're high on openness, you tend to turn to the abstract and the high level stuff, right? So a person who's high on openness is most likely going to try to influence by pointing to vision, pointing to overarching principles, pointing to long-term plans and long-term goals, etc. Whereas someone who's a bit lower on openness is likely more prone to try to influence pointing to particulars, so practical circumstances that the team are facing at the moment, or that the organization is facing at the moment. But from a practical standpoint, what makes sense to do right now? Again, no right or wrong, obviously, but different arguments work differentially well in different contexts. So that's a very interesting nuance to become aware of in your own type of sort of influencing, right? Of course, extroversion and agreeableness, again, have a big role to play here, where someone who is high on agreeableness will most probably employ a much more sort of indirect and soft influencing style, where you try to create consensus, you try to build trust with other people, and sort of slowly get them to see your view. Whereas someone who's a bit lower on agreeableness might be a lot more direct and sort of task-oriented, and simply spit out what you would like other people to do, right? Again, pros and cons with both sides. Extroversion plays in as well, obviously. If you get high extroversion, you're usually a lot more, I would say, comfortable with being assertive in your job role and sort of stepping forward and saying, I think we should do this way. Whereas someone who's a bit lower on extroversion will tend to be a bit more accommodating and perhaps have to sort of step out of their comfort zone a little bit to actively try to influence other people. That's basically that. Should we turn to challenges, Frida?
Absolutely. Let's go for that.
Great. And this is a special section, right? This is also something that's been highly requested by many of you over the years. So some kind of tool to get a deeper view on how a person's personality predisposes them to sort of different risk factors or challenges, if you will. And overall, we at Alva tend to take a fairly conservative view here, in the sense that we do not believe that you, from a mere 5-factor result, can read out anything as strongly as dark side characteristics or something like that. You will need more of a triangulation between different methods to be able to do something like that. What you can do, however, is to look at the different challenges that come with any combination of 5-factor traits. So the basic tenet here is that all constellation personality traits come with their challenges. There is no such thing as a perfect personality, right? So the things that we depict in this section of the report should in no way be perceived as no-goes or dark side characteristics that sort of make this person a poor fit. It's nothing like that. Rather, it's a way to try to depict the challenges or the blind spots that this person is likely to have and might have to handle in their job role, if you will. So I included a couple of examples here on the slide. So first of all, we've got high extroversion paired with high openness. By the way, that's how this section works. And it takes your most sort of extreme factor scores and use those in combination to look at what challenges does this combination produce. So if we get then high extroversion and high openness, this is a combination that comes with all types of positives, right? So probably a very social and innovative character who loves to discuss new ideas and come up with creative stuff through interaction with others, etc. But it might also include the challenge of actually losing interest and engagement when things are no longer new. So this might be a great sort of innovator, but perhaps not that great an implementer, if you will. This person might have to muster up some extra energy to actually finish stuff once the sort of exciting phase of newness is over. Or surround yourself with someone who is more interested in, operationally taking something across the finish line once the big strokes have been set. If instead you look at high conscientiousness paired with low openness, well, here you're going to get a character who is highly detail-oriented, very diligent, very sort of motivated to deliver the right answer, if you will. But on the other hand, that might also risk a sort of rigid perfectionism, where you might lose sight of some of the big picture stuff and get lost in all the details, if you will. That might also mean that you tend to cling a little bit to the established procedures and maybe have to make a little bit of an effort to actively look for new ways of doing things or a more innovative solution. So those are a couple of examples of what challenges might look like.
And I think probably you will see quite a lot of high plus high combinations here, given you will utilize this report later on in the process, late stage hiring. So likely a strong role fit, in the very beginning, likely stronger results. So I think it's very interesting to look at those combinations. Kind of every single coin has two sides, and just to be aware of that also, and to plan the onboarding based on that, etc. To proactively create some awareness and have a plan in place how to potentially mitigate those negative consequences that might lead to.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great point. And I think an added benefit of that is that if you can get that dialogue going early, already in the late stage hiring process, then it tends to get a lot less dramatic, right? This is a dialogue that you've had with your manager already since before you actually got hired, right? And then, bleeding into the onboarding phase and onwards into your journey, right? So getting the dialogue going earlier tends to make it a lot less of a big thing, right? Great. So with that, should we have a look at the actual report, Frida?
I think that's a good idea. Make it a little bit more real. And you're going to see these reports yourself and get the possibility to toggle it on towards the end of this week. So when you wake up fresh Monday morning, you will be able to see it in your Alva Labs account as well.
Yes, exactly. So now you should be able to see the actual report on the screen here.
Yeah.
So hopefully you will now recognize the structure from what we've been talking about. First, you can see that there is a note here saying that the report is today not visible to candidates, just to be super clear on how results are used. And then the report starts from working mode. And for each section here, you will see which 5-factor facets that are counted towards the results. So you see what's included for better transparency and traceability. You will get a descriptive text detailing how this person is likely to make decisions based on their personality. You also get a couple of sliders here to summarize the results a bit more. So here we can see that Gimbert Ventureberg, for instance, is leaning towards the more thoughtful and analytical side rather than fast-moving and instinctive. So that obviously tells us a lot about what kind of decision maker we would bring in with him. We've got detail versus big picture. In the same vein, a slider sort of summarizing the results here. Pace and drive. And we get into relationship mode. Communication style, showing whether this person is likely to be more prepared versus spontaneous, or more cushioned or more direct. Collaboration style, details sort of low key versus high profile dimension, as well as are you more likely to sort of under promise towards your colleagues or over promise compared to what you think you can actually deliver. Influencing style. So here we got 2 sliders detailing whether you tend to be more facts driven or more emotion driven in how you sort of run your arguments, and also whether you lean more towards this subtle way of influencing or more assertive side. And then we get to challenges, where again we work with these combinations of traits, and the model picks out the more extreme ones first. So in Gimbert's case here, we've got the combination of emotional stability and conscientiousness. So the combination of high conscientiousness and low emotional stability, leading up to perhaps the risk of being a bit anxious and being a bit perfectionist in your way of working. And again, detailing which facets go in here. We also get another one based on being high on conscientiousness and pretty low on openness. So again, detailing this risk of rigidity that we talked about earlier that might come with lower openness. And that is basically it. So Monday morning, right, Frida, you will find this on your Alva account.
Exactly. Looking forward already. And I love that the facets are so like they're very clear and transparent. So kind of what you see is what you get. Like this is the source of data for the description.
Exactly. So let's return to the deck then.
Absolutely. I just want to mention also, as Orla did in the chat, we are more than happy to receive questions along the way also. It has started, but don't hesitate to write them directly when you think about it, so you don't forget about it later on.
Of course. So let's jump into some of the core use cases then for this report, turning to the practical side of things. And as mentioned, one of the sort of key use cases here is obviously late stage selection. So the idea here is that at the early stages of the selection process, you want to focus on role fit, right? You want to focus on the person simply having a high fit to the profile that you've set up as being, the template for success in this role. But when you get to the late stage, then you probably want to shift a bit to understanding how a person is likely to operate in practice. So sort of what kind of grade are we getting? Because even if you've got 2 candidates that have a great high role fit, there might be a lot of underlying differences there, right? They are both very likely to do the job in a great way, but they're going to operate in slightly different ways. And we're going to look at an example of that. So the idea is that then you can use this report as an additional layer to read out, what's this person's readiness for ambiguity and complexity? How are they likely to function under pressure? Can they sustain performance over time? Could also be a sharper input for late stage interviews and reference taking, obviously. So if we look at an example here, let's say that we've got a recruitment process and we've narrowed it down to 2 final candidates for a senior specialist role. They both have near identical high role fit scores. As you can see here, candidate number 1 has a role fit of 87. Candidate number 2 has a role fit of 85. But deep insights might then surface some differences that might actually, have a lot of impact now that you're getting towards the end of the process. So candidate 1 is mapped out as really thought through, very methodical and considered in their decision making, steady and consistent in their sort of work pace over time, a sort of cushioned and diplomatic communicator, and someone who tends to be fairly sort of accommodating and flexible and agreeableness. Looking at candidate number 2 tells a slightly different story, right? So here we get someone who's more action-oriented, decisive and fast-moving, who likes to work in bursts of energy, who tends to be fairly intense, who's more direct in their communication, more clear in the no-nonsense approach, and also someone who's more straightforward and firm and principled in their approach. Again, both are highly likely to do the job well, but you're going to get different types of operators here. And this obviously can be very informative when you start doing these sort of very contextual considerations of what kind of team environment are you bringing this person into? How's the team likely to react to these different styles, etc.?
And I think these are conversations that TA partners very often have with hiring managers, but to get some more, words to those discussions and to actually have a data point to bring to the table instead of relying on, potential gut feeling in unstructured interviews, you can trust these insights to complement your decision making to make a more informed decision.
Exactly. That's the idea of it. And just to sort of bring this point home again, the idea is not for this report to replace role fit, quite to the contrary. The idea here is to give you an additional interpretive layer towards the end of the process, when you have already done the groundwork of ensuring that all candidates that you've brought this far have a really high role fit. So the idea would be we would still recommend the same ideal process, in the sense that you start with some kind of screening for readiness, right, to ensure basic relevance in place. You run Alva's tests with the help of a personality profile and the logic weight to assess basic potential for the role. You run your structured interviews to assess skills and culture, etc. Oftentimes you run some kind of structured case exercise when you have narrowed candidates down a bit. And then you have got deep insights at the sort of late stage layer to make a more qualitative deep dive, and perhaps to get some input for your reference checks towards the end of the process.
And as the volumes are decreasing more and more throughout the process, I think it will come quite naturally to, bring up this deep insights when you have a little bit more capacity towards the end with your final candidates.
Yep.
I know
to be sure. So let's look at use case number 2 then, which is leadership development. And at Alva, we tend to talk a lot about strategic self-awareness when it comes to using personality for development, right? The idea here is that your personality brings certain natural tendencies or natural strengths that act as these neurological highways, if you will, the things that come easily for you, the things that you have sort of an unfair advantage in. And a lot of career development has to do with, finding out how to utilize those natural strengths in the best possible way. And when you've got a leadership role, you've also got the added benefit of understanding how you are affecting others in your leadership role by means of your personality, right? So how do I make decisions under pressure? How do others experience my communication style? Which environments bring out my best performance? Which profiles complement me best? That's also a really important aspect, not least in leadership roles, right? That where do I need to work on my challenges, and where do I simply need to surround myself with people that have complementing strengths and can sort of offload some of the stuff that does not come easily for me. So this is really useful in coaching and leadership programs, etc. Here we got an example again. So let's say we've got a leader who's taken the personality test. We get the deep insights report out, and it becomes this sort of a mirror, right? in this case, we've got a profile of someone who's highly detail-oriented, precise and structured, and driven by accuracy, and also quite action-oriented and likes to get stuff done. Well, then obviously here we've got a really operational profile, right? So someone who probably loves to be an operational leader and think through, how are we going to implement this? How are we going to get it done in practice? How can we structure work and so codify our processes to work in the best possible way? But on the other hand, maybe this person also gets absorbed in these operational details and has a bit of a harder time zooming out, leaving perhaps too little time for overarching strategy. And this might serve as a really good template for discussing your next career move, right? So is it worth it for you to move into a more strategic leadership role where more of your time will actually be spent thinking about these broad strokes and drawing up the broader strategies? You might have to leave some of the operational stuff behind. Or is this actually a strength that you want to lean even further into and perhaps take a broader responsibility when it comes to operations? That might be one example. Third and finally, we've got talent management. So the idea here is obviously to paint a more nuanced picture of your high potentials. So one of the big challenges when it comes to talent management is, what are you actually going to do with the people once you've identified them as high potentials? And here, the deep insights layer, I think, can work as a really nice way of getting the discussion going on where you should go next, right? So what kinds of strengths do we see in this report? And what kinds of roles internally do those strengths play to? So where are you most likely to thrive? Which career moves might you actually want to be more cautious about? And where do you need stronger strategies to advance? So again, finding this balance between playing to your strengths, working on some challenges perhaps, but also sometimes accepting that some career moves might not be for you, given your sort of natural strengths.
And I think these use cases within like development, talent management, succession planning, etc., that is more and more relevant for talent acquisition partners. I think we could see before, like a few years back, it was often TA and employee branding like paired up in the very same role. And now that is shifting, as far as I can see, at least with my customers, a little bit more towards TA and learning and development. So, that upskilling TA within L&D and to kind of utilize these reports also for employees is really, really beneficial. And if those roles are very separate and perhaps siloed even, it's a great way to kind of build that bridge between TA and HR.
Certainly. And I think the more stakeholders that are involved in employee development in all kinds of ways, the better, actually, since we are more and more realizing that this is such a key this is such a key part of our job within TA as well as in HR and as managers, right, to actually make people grow.
Yeah, especially like the age of technology and AI, etc. Like roles are being transformed, right, and changing very rapidly, and the market is still quite challenging. So internal mobility and just growth and upskilling is so relevant today.
Definitely. So, with that being said, let's jump into the Q&A and see what we've got.
Fun. 10 minutes left, so we have room for more questions than what we have received, so keep them coming. But I can share with you, Kajsa, the first one that we received here from Simon, and he is asking how Deep Insights reports compare to the leadership report, which is an already existing feature in Alva. You describe that the main difference.
Great question. So as you know, we've also got the leadership report that sort of depicts strengths and challenges within 9 different areas of leadership. And the basic difference here is that the Deep Insights report is crafted to work for any type of role. So not confined to leadership at all, but rather, circling in on areas that are relevant to any role in an organization. organization, and especially perhaps the more senior ones. So you can definitely use deep insights for leaders as well, but it will tell you less about their behavior specifically in a leadership role and more the sort of broader areas that touch all of us at work.
Very good answer. So applicable for everyone. That's great.
Exactly.
Because I think we've had a lot of requests around like the leadership report, it is very interesting and relevant, but this isn't a leadership position or someone manager. So which kind of insights can I then utilize? So then you have this report ready at your fingertips. We have another question for you to elaborate a little bit more on. You mentioned like this is not a clinical tool for diagnosing someone or pointing out dark traits, etc. Can you explain like a little bit more how it differs from, for example, Hogan when it comes to measuring derailment?
Right. So the Hogan HDS test explicitly says that it's about derailment tendencies, which is usually defined as sort of the less, let's say, constructive behaviors that you're likely to show under pressure. My take is that the Hogan test goes a little bit further in the clinical direction and perhaps sort of takes out a bit, goes out a bit more on a limb based on what you can actually read from a self-assessment test, whereas we tend to be a little bit more conservative here. And also, we don't use that strong a language when it comes to pointing out that something is a big risk or something in the work environment, but rather that this is a challenge that this person needs to be aware of and can work on. So we're a little bit more conservative in our approach, I would say.
Thank you for that. Another question coming up here. So Alexander is asking, in which way we might take account for like unusual or inconsistent response patterns, or that you're like socially desirably want to answer in a certain way, if you're not consistent, etc. Is there any way that the test or the report would take that into account?
Interesting question. And I guess that you might suspect, right, that if you would take a bespoke derailment test or a bespoke test of dark side characteristics, that you would actually show more of this social desirability pattern, right? That you want to depict yourself in a certain way because that kind of test would appear more high stakes. I think one of the benefits of this is that it's based on the basic 5-factor result, right? So I think that the risk of social desirability is obviously no higher for the Deep Insights report than for our basic 5-factor report. Is there a certain social desirability in taking a 5-factor test in the recruitment setting too? Yes, obviously there is. But then again, studies find that the effect is not big enough to sort of offset the validity of the test. Since Alva's 5-factor test is based on this adaptive technology, the idea is that the test continues to ask more questions until you've got reliable enough results. So if you answer in a very inconsistent way, well, then you're going to get more questions, more items until the model is sort of certain about where you're standing on the scale. So that's the basic way that we're approaching that.
Good to be aware of. Thank you for explaining. And if you have, of course, further discussions, concrete examples, you want to talk to us, like don't be a stranger. We're very nerdy here and we would love to dive deeper with you offline afterwards. We have another question here around interviewing. In which way could I potentially use Deep Insights for final stage interviews? You mentioned reference checks as well, like a little bit more practical guidance there would be helpful.
Right, great question. So For further development of this feature, we would love to build in, an automatic translation of this into interview questions or reference questions, for instance. That's not available yet. But already now, I think you can use the report to create some hypotheses around things you would like to ask further about, both in a late stage interview, but also when you talk to references. So let's say we've got a person who gets like Gimbert in our example, gets a challenge mapped out as there being a risk of being an anxious perfectionist, for instance. Well, then obviously when you talk to references for this person, you might want to ask some questions around, can you tell me about a situation where this person had to finalize something without having the time to make it perfect or something like that, to sort of validate whether these results also hold up in practice.
Good to be aware of. And I think these are, again, really valuable insights towards the end of the process, again, into onboarding, into development, to look at the full circle of life for a candidate to an employee. Amazing. There is no more questions in the chat. If I were you, I was going to be curious to wonder, like, is this included for everyone? And yes, it is. Like, this is something that we're more than happy to give you as a little present from Alva. So at no cost, of course. And you will find that the toggle on again from Monday. If you go to your candidate and you go to your role and you go to assessments, or bedömningar in Swedish, you will find the toggle there, as Kajsa showed, next to the leadership report. So just as a little reminder there. Any other questions before we wrap up? You were too good, Kajsa. Like, you were answering all the questions with your content along the way.
I doubt that, but obviously we're always available for more questions after the session as well. Don't be a stranger.
100%. And if you are an Alva customer and you have your customer success manager that you partner up with, like, we are more than happy to share insights with you. And if you find it needed, like, set up a training with your TA team. So really connect with us, and we are more than happy to help you out. And looking forward to hear again even more feedback and reactions from Monday, when you will see the report toggle being there in your account. Amazing. Something else from you, Kajsa? Any final words before we wrap up?
No, just super excited to hear more of the customer feedback once this is out in the open. So if you've got any feedback, like requests for further developments or things that we could do to improve the feature, let us know.
100%. But thank you so much for calling in today, everyone. And thank you, Kajsa, for a very thorough and clear overview. I really, really enjoyed it and feeling excited to see this fly in practice as well.
Well, thank you, Frida, for great moderation of the conversation.
Of course, thanks. But we'll give you 2 more minutes to maybe, wrap up and have a bio break and prep for maybe you have an interview now in 2 minutes. So I know it's hectic times here towards the summer vacation. So we'll give you a couple of minutes to prepare for your next call. But thank you again for investing your time with us here this afternoon. Cheers from Alva Labs.